Wisdom. While the Bible's wisdom literature addresses flourishing and the common good, I will narrow my focus to defining wisdom, to wise leadership, and to how wisdom shapes policy. Defining wisdom. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." The fear of God is the foundation of all wisdom. Author Jonathan Lehman defines wisdom. Rather, wisdom is both the posture of fearing the Lord, as well as the skill of living in God's created but fallen world in a way that yields justice, peace, and flourishing. Volf also defines wisdom as a way of life that lines up with God's design. Correspondingly, Christian wisdom, in one sense, is that faith itself, an overarching interpretation of reality, a set of convictions, attitudes, and practices that direct people in living their lives well. Here, living well means living as God created human beings to live, rather than living against the grain of their own true reality and the reality of the world. Wisdom, in this sense, is an integrated way of life that enables the flourishing of persons, communities, and all creation. Wisdom is living life God's way. Living according to God's designs, even unintentionally, is still wise. Common grace wisdom can help create the common good. When reading the Old in light of the New, it becomes apparent that the personification of wisdom as a woman in Proverbs 8 is fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus was filled with wisdom and identified himself as the embodiment of Lady Wisdom. But wisdom is proved right by her deeds. Proverbs 8 and Colossians 1:15-17 show that Paul identifies Jesus as fulfilling God's wisdom. To meet Christ is to meet full wisdom. Believers receive wisdom through knowing Christ, being a part of the church, and seeing his providential education of their life. To ignore Jesus, however, is to forsake wisdom. Volf writes, "To reject wisdom as a way of life, or Christ as the embodiment of wisdom, is not like leaving the dessert untouched after a good meal. Rather, it is like refusing the very nourishment without which human beings cannot truly flourish." Wise leadership. God gave Israel and its rulers access to wisdom to help them govern. When God offered King Solomon anything he wanted, he asked for wisdom to govern God's people. As a result, the people recognized the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. Lehman writes, "Kings, congressmen, ambassadors, generals, police officers, voters, city council members, public school teachers, judges, and juries need wisdom. They need the wisdom of God to do justice. Godly wisdom enables justice." Old Testament scholar Dr. Tremper Longman III connects wisdom with good leaders. The nation benefits from having leaders who are characterized by the kind of virtues highlighted by the book of Proverbs: humility, temperate speech and emotional expression, a desire for justice and fairness, an openness to listen to advice from wise advisors, a desire to protect the vulnerable, and more. Good government needs wise leadership. While non-Christian government officials might not have biblical wisdom, they may still show a measure of wisdom. Conversely, some politicians may express trust in God to win votes, yet their lives show a lack of wisdom. Their character and actions do not bear the fruit of conforming to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount ethic. The church must guard against them, linking arms with the Christian community, and can pray for them to gain wisdom or leave office. Wise policies and people. Wisdom helps Christians find the common good. Longman explains how the Bible gives believers wisdom principles, but not specific policies. Instead, wisdom helps people apply scriptural principles to a particular time and place, finding solutions to the issues they face. The Bible will give us essential principles as well as attitudes or dispositions to keep in our minds and hearts as we advocate for and implement particular public policies. But the exact nature of those public policies depends on a host of factors that are connected to the specific concrete historical situation at the time. To implement the biblical principles relevant to public policy, therefore, requires a knowledge not only of the principles themselves, but also the situation at the moment the policies are being developed, as well as the people involved. The ability to apply the right principle in a way appropriate to a particular situation is what the Bible calls wisdom. Much of voting, policy writing, and political engagement comes down to making wise choices. Moving from the Bible to just policy takes wisdom and understanding. Lehman explains how difficult this process can be. He writes, Christians will disagree and sometimes argue about whether a certain candidate or policy is more or less biblical, or at least wise. And what we all need is the wisdom to know whether something is clearly biblical, binding all Christians, or whether it belongs entirely to the domain of Christian freedom. We live in a complex world full of complex problems and motivations. It is easier to make snap judgments than to take the time to understand a problem, position, or person fully. Wisdom, instead, takes time to investigate thoughtfully, process, and make a God-honoring judgment. A more thoughtful approach helps avoid feelings of frustration and hurt, which are so familiar to political discourse. When believers carefully investigate political issues and why others vote and engage the way they do, churches, communities, and relationships will flourish. To learn more about the importance of wisdom in Christian political engagement, please check out my sermon on wisdom as part of my Flourish series, or check out the rest of my Doctor of Ministry thesis paper audio reading. Thank you. Please like and subscribe.